The void of space tore open like black fabric being ripped apart. Massive ships poured through the opening, their hulls gleaming with a strange blue light. The Zephyrian Imperial fleet had arrived at the edge of human space, and they came with purpose. Admiral Koreth Vex stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the tactical displays show their target system ahead. 3,000 years of conquest had taught him that most species surrendered the moment they saw his fleet. Today would be no different. The Zephyrian ships were works of art and terror combined. Each vessel stretched for miles, covered in crystalline armor that could deflect energy weapons and kinetic rounds alike. Their hulls pulsed with power conduits that fed massive weapon systems capable of cracking planets. The fleet formation was perfect, each ship positioned to maximize their firepower and intimidate any who dared oppose them. Admiral Vex had used this same formation to cow 100 different species into submission. Captain Jake Morrison was having a quiet morning aboard the USS Liberty when his communications officer picked up the unusual readings. The Liberty was an exploration vessel, not a warship, though the distinction meant less in human space than it once had. Morrison was reviewing supply reports when Lieutenant Commander Ryan Carter called out from his station. "Captain, we have unknown contacts dropping out of hyperspace near the Proxima system," Carter said, his fingers dancing across his console. "Reading approximately 200 vessels. Configuration unknown." Commander Lisa Brooks looked up from her own station where she had been monitoring deep space communications. "Sir, we are receiving a transmission on standard galactic frequencies. It appears to be a first contact scenario." Morrison sat down, his coffee, and walked to the center of the bridge. The Liberty was a comfortable ship, designed for long-range exploration rather than combat. The bridge was spacious and well-lit, with large view screens that could display everything from star charts to tactical readouts. Chief Engineer Pete Williams emerged from the engine room, wiping his hands on a rag and looking curious about the sudden activity. "Let's hear what they have to say," Morrison said, settling into his captain's chair. The main screen flickered and displayed the image of an alien being unlike anything in human databases. Admiral Vex had a humanoid shape, but stood nearly 8 feet tall. His skin was a deep purple color with silver markings that seemed to shift and move. His eyes were large and completely black, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "Primitive species of Sol 3, Admiral Vex began, his words translated perfectly by the ship's computers. "You exist now under the shadow of the mighty Zephyrian Empire. For 3,000 of your years, we have brought order to the galaxy. 1,000 star systems bow before our power. 10,000 species serve our glory. Your time of independence ends today." Morrison glanced around his bridge crew and saw the same expression on all their faces that he felt on his own. It was the look people got when they heard something so unexpected that they needed a moment to process it. Then Carter snorted, trying to hold back laughter. Brooks covered her mouth with her hand, her shoulders shaking. Williams just grinned and shook his head. Admiral Vex continued his speech, unaware of the reaction he was getting. "You will submit your governments to our rule. You will provide tribute of resources and labor. You will abandon your primitive ways and accept the civilization we offer. Resistance is futile. Your technology cannot stand against our might. You have one solar rotation to consider our generous offer before we demonstrate the consequences of defiance." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the Liberty in silence for exactly 3 seconds before the laughter started. It began as quiet chuckling from Carter but quickly spread to the entire bridge crew. Brooks was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. Williams was slapping his knee and grinning from ear to ear. Even Morrison, who tried to maintain professional composure, found himself chuckling. "Did he just call us primitive?" Brooks asked between gasps of laughter. "I think he did," Morrison replied, wiping his eyes. "Pete, how long since we updated the non-interference protocols for this sector?" Williams pulled up a display on his tablet. "Let me check the cultural development reports. Looks like the Zephyrian Empire is classified as a developing civilization. Under Standard Protocol 7, they are listed as not yet ready for full contact." "Well, they just made contact with us," Carter pointed out. "That changes things." Morrison nodded and opened a communication channel. He took a moment to compose himself, though he was still smiling. Zephyrian Fleet. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the USS Liberty. Thank you for the introduction. We appreciate you taking the time to visit our little corner of space. We will need some time to discuss your offer among ourselves. We will get back to you shortly. Liberty out. He closed the channel and turned to Brooks. Lisa, send a message to Fleet Command. Let them know we have a first contact situation with a species that seems to think they are conquering us. Should I mention that they apparently do not know what humans are capable of? Brooks asked. Let's keep it simple for now, Morrison replied. Also, send word to the local traffic control. We might have some visitors coming to see what all the fuss is about. Aboard the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Vex stared at his communications panel in confusion. In 3 millennia of conquest, no species had ever responded to his ultimatum with such casual dismissal. His tactical officer, Commander Zara Keth, looked equally puzzled. Admiral, their response was most unusual, she said. They showed no fear, made no pleas for mercy, and seemed almost amused by our demands. Vex drummed his claws on his command chair. Perhaps they do not understand our power. Prepare a demonstration. Target their weakest vessel and show them what happens to those who do not take the Empire seriously. Sir, I am detecting multiple hyperspace signatures approaching our position, the sensor officer called out. Human vessels are arriving. The tactical display updated to show new contacts dropping out of hyperspace around the Zephyrian fleet. But these were not the sleek warships that Admiral Vex expected. Instead, his scanners showed what appeared to be a collection of civilian vessels. There was a converted cargo hauler, several mining ships, what looked like a passenger liner, and various other craft that seemed to have been designed for peaceful purposes rather than war. These are their defenders, Commander Keth asked, studying the readings. They appear to be commercial vessels. Admiral Vex was beginning to feel the first stirrings of unease. Something was not right about this situation. In his experience, primitive species either cowered in fear or sent their most powerful warships to meet his fleet. They did not respond with laughter and cargo ships. The communication system activated again, and Captain Morrison's voice filled the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. Zephyrian Fleet, this is Captain Morrison again. Before we begin formal discussions, we wanted to extend an invitation. We are planning a small welcome gathering for your arrival. Nothing fancy, just some food and conversation. We have some excellent barbecue recipes we would love to share, and we are curious about your culture. Would you be interested in joining us for dinner? Admiral Vex looked at his command staff in complete bewilderment. The mighty Zephyrian Empire, terror of the galaxy, had just been invited to a barbecue. Commander Keth cleared her throat. Admiral, how should we respond? For the first time in his long career, Admiral Vex had no idea what to say. Admiral Vex decided that these humans needed to understand the reality of their situation. The casual way they had dismissed his ultimatum and their strange invitation to share food showed they did not comprehend the power they faced. He would provide them with a demonstration they could not ignore. Target the smallest human vessel, he commanded his weapons officer. We will show them what happens to those who do not show proper respect to the Empire. The weapons officer began charging the primary plasma cannon of the Eternal Dominion. The massive weapon drew power from the ship's core, building energy that could vaporize a small moon. Across the Zephyrian fleet, other vessels powered their weapons as well, creating a display of destructive potential that had convinced countless species to surrender without firing a shot. The target Admiral Vex had chosen was a converted mining ship called the Rusty Bucket. The vessel looked ancient by Zephyrian standards, its hull patched and weathered from years of hard work in asteroid fields. To Admiral Vex, it represented everything weak and pathetic about these humans. They sent their garbage ships to meet the greatest fleet in the galaxy. Captain Betty Newman commanded the Rusty Bucket with the casual confidence of someone who had spent 40 years mining asteroids in the most dangerous regions of space. She was a small woman with gray hair and laugh lines around her eyes, but her crew knew better than to underestimate her. When the Zephyrian flagship began charging its weapons, she simply poured herself another cup of coffee and watched the energy readings climb. Captain, they appear to be targeting us with some kind of plasma weapon, reported her engineer, Jimmy Torres, from his station. Energy output is quite impressive for their technology level. Betty nodded and took a sip of her coffee. Well, that's neighborly of them. Jimmy, would you mind handling that? I just got this coffee the way I like it, and I would hate to spill it. Jimmy Torres was barely 25 years old and had just graduated from engineering school the previous year. His first assignment had been aboard the Rusty Bucket, because Betty Newman was known for training the best engineers in human space. He looked at his displays and activated what humans called a basic deflector array. The technology was so common on human ships that most people never thought about it. Every vessel, from the smallest shuttle to the largest explorer, carried deflector arrays as standard equipment. They were used to push aside space debris, deflect solar radiation, and handle the 1,000 small hazards of space travel. Jimmy had installed dozens of them during his training. The plasma beam lanced out from the Eternal Dominion with enough power to crack a planet. The brilliant energy bolt crossed the distance between the fleets in seconds, striking the Rusty Bucket with devastating force. Admiral Vex watched his tactical display with satisfaction, expecting to see the human vessel vaporized instantly. Instead, the plasma beam struck an invisible barrier around the mining ship and reflected back toward the Zephyrian fleet. The redirected energy bolt forced 3 Zephyrian cruisers to take emergency evasive maneuvers to avoid being hit by their own weapon. The Rusty Bucket sat in space completely undamaged, not even a scorch mark on its ancient hull. Interesting, Betty Newman commented, watching the Zephyrian ships scramble to avoid their reflected attack. Their targeting systems are pretty good, but their defensive theory needs work. Aboard the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Vex stared at his displays in shock. His most powerful weapon had not only failed to destroy the target, but had been turned back against his own fleet. His science officer was frantically running diagnostics, trying to understand what had happened. "Admiral," the science officer stammered. The energy beam was deflected by some kind of force field. But the power requirements for such a defense should be enormous. I cannot detect the source of the energy. Commander Keth studied her own readings with growing concern. "Sir, their deflection was not just defensive. They somehow redirected our plasma beam with perfect accuracy. The level of control required suggests extremely advanced field manipulation technology." Captain Morrison's voice came over the communication system again, sounding amused rather than threatened. "That was quite a light show, Admiral Vex. Is that your best party trick? Here, let us show you one of ours." The human vessel that responded was the converted cruise liner Stardancer. Captain Maria Santos had been running pleasure trips to neighboring galaxies just the week before, taking wealthy tourists to see exotic nebulas and alien worlds. Her ship was designed for comfort rather than combat, with luxurious cabins and observation decks that offered spectacular views of space. Captain Santos activated her ship's dimensional fold drive, a piece of technology she had installed the previous month, because her passengers complained that regular faster-than-light travel was too slow. The Stardancer began to bend space around itself, creating ripples in reality that made the Zephyrian hyperspace drives look like primitive chemical rockets. The massive cruise ship seemed to stretch and twist, existing in multiple dimensions, simultaneously. Space folded around it like origami, creating geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. For a moment, the Stardancer was simultaneously in its original position and 1,000 kilometers away, demonstrating casual manipulation of space-time that the Zephyrians had never imagined possible. "This little thing," Captain Santos said over the communication channel, her voice carrying the pride of someone showing off a new toy. "I had it installed last month when we started getting bookings for the Andromeda runs. The warranty is still good, though I should probably register it with the Department of Reality Engineering when we get back to Earth." Admiral Vex felt something he had not experienced in centuries of conquest: fear. These humans were casually demonstrating technology that made his mighty fleet look like stone tools. The science officer was babbling about impossible physics, while the tactical displays showed more human ships arriving every few minutes. Each new human vessel seemed more impossibly advanced than the last. A garbage collection ship commanded by Captain Danny Price demonstrated matter conversion technology by transforming a field of space debris into neatly organized raw materials. The captain explained that he was just cleaning up the area because his company had a contract to keep the shipping lanes tidy. A research vessel called the Curious Mind opened a temporary wormhole to retrieve coffee from Earth because its captain, Dr. Susan Clark, insisted that first contact situations required proper refreshments. She apologized for the delay, explaining that she had to go back twice because the first batch of coffee was not quite right. You cannot have meaningful diplomatic contact without decent coffee, Dr. Clark explained to the increasingly bewildered Zephyrians. It is basically the first rule of interspecies relations. The human fleet continued to grow as more ships arrived through various impossible means. Some folded space, others seemed to simply appear without any detectable energy signature, and at least one vessel arrived by what appeared to be stepping sideways through reality itself. Each captain greeted the Zephyrians with friendly waves and casual comments about the weather. Admiral Vex realized that his demonstration of power had accomplished exactly the opposite of what he intended. Instead of showing the humans their helplessness, he had prompted them to casually display technology that made the Zephyrian Empire look like children playing with toys. "Commander Keth," he said quietly, "I think we may have made a mistake." Commander Keth was studying the tactical readings and shaking her head in disbelief. "Admiral, their weakest ship just deflected our strongest weapon without apparent effort. Their civilian vessels are demonstrating technology that violates everything we know about physics. I think we may be significantly outclassed here. Captain." Morrison's voice came over the communication system one more time, still sounding friendly and relaxed. "Admiral Vex, the invitation for dinner still stands. We have plenty of food and we would love to learn more about your culture." "What do you say?" Admiral Vex decided to try a different approach. Direct confrontation had failed spectacularly, but perhaps he could still salvage the situation through cultural dominance. The Zephyrian Empire had perfected the art of overwhelming primitive species with displays of their advanced civilization and glorious history. Surely these humans would be impressed once they understood the true scope of Zephyrian achievements. He activated the fleet's communication array and began broadcasting the complete cultural package that had convinced thousands of species to submit willingly to imperial rule. The transmission included holographic displays of Zephyrian architecture, art, and technology, along with detailed historical records of their conquests and the civilizations they had absorbed. "Humans of the Sol system," Admiral Vex announced, his voice carrying the weight of 3 millennia of accumulated authority, "Behold the glory of the Zephyrian Empire. We have brought order to the chaos of the galaxy. 1,000 star systems prosper under our guidance. 10,000 species have abandoned their primitive ways to embrace the civilization we offer." The holographic displays showed towering crystal cities that stretched toward the sky, massive space stations that housed billions of beings, and fleets of ships that had carried Zephyrian culture to the far reaches of the galaxy. The historical records detailed the conquest of species after species, each adding their unique strengths to the growing imperial collective. "We do not destroy," Admiral Vex continued, warming to his theme. "We improve. We take the scattered chaos of independent worlds and forge them into something greater. Under our rule, war becomes impossible because all beings serve the same glorious purpose. Poverty disappears because imperial resources are distributed according to need and merit. The strong guide the weak toward enlightenment." The transmission concluded with images of species from across the galaxy living together in harmony under Zephyrian rule, their diverse cultures preserved but guided by imperial wisdom. It was a presentation that had convinced countless civilizations to surrender without a fight, seeing the benefits of joining something larger than themselves. The human response was not what Admiral Vex expected. Instead of awe or immediate submission, Captain Morrison replied with genuine enthusiasm that somehow felt more insulting than outright rejection. "That sounds wonderful, Admiral," Morrison said, his voice carrying the tone of an adult praising a child's artwork. "You folks have really accomplished something impressive there. Would you like to come aboard the Liberty for that dinner? We would love to hear more about your civilization." The invitation was accepted, though Admiral Vex was beginning to suspect he was walking into some kind of trap. He selected a small diplomatic party and transported to the human vessel, expecting to find a primitive ship that would at least allow him to maintain some dignity through technological superiority. The USS Liberty was not what he expected. The ship was comfortable rather than impressive, designed with an eye toward long-term livability rather than intimidating displays of power. The corridors were wide and well-lit, with soft carpeting underfoot and artwork on the walls that depicted scenes from dozens of different worlds. The overall impression was of a vessel designed by people who expected to live aboard it for years rather than merely survive. Captain Morrison met them in the main dining hall, which had been set up for the cultural exchange potluck he had mentioned. Tables were arranged in a casual circle, laden with food from across human space. There were barbecued meats from Earth, exotic fruits from the agricultural worlds, and dishes that seemed to have been prepared by a dozen different species working together. "Welcome aboard," Morrison said, gesturing toward the spread of food. "Please help yourselves. We have been looking forward to this conversation." Chief Science Officer Nathan Hughes was examining a Zephyrian datapad with the focused attention of an academic studying an interesting historical artifact. He looked up as Admiral Vex approached and smiled with genuine pleasure. "Your technology is fascinating from a historical perspective," Hughes said, apparently unaware that his comment might be considered offensive. "The energy distribution systems are remarkably efficient for their complexity level. It reminds me of some early human designs from about 3 centuries ago. You folks have really maximized the potential of fusion-based power generation." Dr. Susan Clark had spread out several research papers on one of the tables and was taking notes as she examined Zephyrian cultural records. She looked up with the excitement of a scholar who had discovered something genuinely interesting. "I hope you do not mind," she said to Admiral Vex, "but I have been analyzing your conquest patterns and they show remarkable similarities to early human tribal expansion behaviors. I am thinking of publishing a comparative study. Would you mind if I included some of your historical data?" Admiral Vex found himself in the surreal position of being studied like a museum exhibit by beings he had come to conquer. Commander Keth, who had accompanied him to the human ship, was engaged in conversation with Commander Brooks about military tactics. The human officer was politely listening to descriptions of Zephyrian battle formations while occasionally nodding and making notes. "That is a really clever adaptation of the encirclement strategy," Brooks said when Keth finished describing a particularly successful campaign. "We used something similar back when we were still doing the whole conquest thing. Of course, that was before we developed orbital bombardment systems, so the tactical considerations were quite different." The casual way she mentioned orbital bombardment, as if it were a hobby that humans had outgrown, made Admiral Vex realize that he was dealing with something far beyond his experience. These humans spoke about conquest and warfare the way adults might discuss childhood games they had enjoyed, but no longer found interesting. Captain Betty Newman had joined the gathering, bringing samples of food from her ship's galley. She was discussing terraforming techniques with one of the Zephyrian science officers, explaining how her cousin Eddie ran a company that created habitable planets as a side business. "It started as a hobby project," she said, passing around a plate of what appeared to be space-grown vegetables. "Eddie was bored after retiring from stellar engineering, so he figured he would try making planets instead of fixing stars. Last I heard, he had finished about 15,000 worlds and was thinking about branching out into custom solar systems." The Zephyrian science officer stared at her in disbelief. 15,000 worlds? That is more than our entire empire controls." "Oh, these are just the habitable ones," Betty clarified. "He makes a lot more planets than that, but most of them are just for mining or research stations. The habitable ones take more work because you have to get the ecosystem balance just right." Chief Engineer Pete Williams had brought some of the younger Zephyrian officers to see the Liberty's engine room, where he was explaining human propulsion systems with the patience of a teacher working with particularly slow students. Ensign Kevin Brooks, barely out of the academy, had volunteered to help demonstrate the technology. "The dimensional fold drive is pretty basic once you understand the math," Kevin was saying, apparently unaware that he was describing technology that made Zephyrian hyperspace drives look like primitive chemical rockets. "My senior project was building a more efficient version using spare parts from the engineering lab. Want me to show you how it works?" Admiral Vex listened to conversations happening all around him and slowly realized that what he had thought was a primitive species, barely out of their home system, was actually a post-scarcity civilization that had solved problems the Empire did not even know existed. The humans were not impressed by Zephyrian achievements because they had surpassed them centuries ago and moved on to challenges that made galactic conquest look like a children's game. The most crushing realization came when Dr. Clark mentioned that humans had encountered the Zephyrian Empire decades ago, but had classified them as a developing civilization under something called the Non-Interference Directive. "We have been watching your expansion with great interest," she explained, apparently unaware of the devastating implications of her words. "Your cultural development patterns are really quite remarkable for a species at your stage of social evolution." The cultural exchange continued for several hours, but Admiral Vex found himself growing more uncomfortable with each passing minute. Every conversation revealed another layer of human advancement that made Zephyrian achievements look primitive, by comparison. The casual way the humans discussed their technology and capabilities suggested they were holding back the full truth about what they could accomplish. Captain Morrison noticed the Admiral's growing distress and decided it was time for complete honesty. He had hoped to ease the Zephyrians into understanding their situation gradually, but it was becoming clear that a direct explanation would be kinder than allowing them to discover the truth piece by piece. "Admiral Vex," Morrison said, drawing, the Zephyrian leader aside from the main group, "I think we need to have a more serious conversation. Would you mind joining me in my ready room?" The two commanders walked through the ship's corridors to a small office adjacent to the bridge. Morrison's ready room was comfortable and informal, with bookshelves lining the walls and a large window that looked out at the stars. He gestured for Admiral Vex to take a seat and poured 2 cups of coffee from a thermal carafe. "I want you to know that we appreciate the honor you have shown us by coming here," Morrison began, choosing his words. "Carefully. First contact situations are always delicate, and we want to handle this properly." Admiral Vex accepted the coffee but did not drink it. His large black eyes studied Morrison intently, trying to read the human's intentions. "Your species is not what we expected," he admitted. "Our intelligence gathering suggested that humans were a primitive species barely capable of interstellar travel." Morrison nodded sympathetically. "I can understand the confusion. We try to keep a low profile in this part of the galaxy. The truth is, humans achieved faster-than-light travel about 3 centuries ago, but we found space exploration somewhat boring after the first 50 years. He activated a holographic display that showed a map of the local galaxy cluster. Thousands of star systems were marked in blue, indicating human presence or influence. The scale of the display made the Zephyrian Empire's territory look like a small island in a vast ocean. "We have been to other galaxies," Morrison continued, his tone remaining conversational despite the earth-shattering implications of his words. "Andromeda is nice. Good fishing in the outer spiral arms. The Sculptor Galaxy Group has some interesting phenomena. But honestly, after you have seen a few trillion stars, they all start to look pretty much the same." Admiral Vex stared at the display in growing horror. The blue markers representing human presence extended far beyond the boundaries of known space. The mighty Zephyrian Empire, which he had believed controlled a significant portion of the galaxy, occupied barely 1,000th of the territory shown as under human influence. "How long have you known about us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Morrison touched a control and the display zoomed in on Zephyrian space. A soft green boundary appeared around their territory, pulsing gently like a protective barrier. "We first encountered your species about 40 years ago when one of your scout ships accidentally wandered outside your normal expansion zone. We classified you as a developing civilization under Standard Protocol 7 and established this protection boundary to prevent any accidents." The implications hit Admiral Vex like a physical blow. "You mean we are contained? The Great Zephyrian Empire exists at your sufferance?" "We prefer to think of it as protection," Morrison said gently. "Your species is going through a natural phase of development. Most civilizations go through a conquest and empire-building stage before they mature into something more sustainable. We did it ourselves about 1,000 years ago, though we were much more destructive than you have been." Dr. Clark entered, the ready room carrying a thick folder of documents. She had been listening to the conversation through the ship's internal communication system and felt it was important to provide Admiral Vex with more complete information about his species. "Situation? I hope you do not mind the interruption," she said, settling into a chair across from the two commanders. "I thought you might want to see some of our observational data about Zephyrian cultural development." She opened the folder and spread out charts and graphs that detailed centuries of Zephyrian expansion. The documents showed population growth, technological advancement, territorial acquisition, and cultural evolution, tracked with the precision of a long-term scientific study. Your species has been remarkably consistent in its development patterns, Dr. Clark explained with academic enthusiasm. The conquest phase typically lasts between 2,000 and 4,000 years for most civilizations. You are approaching the upper end of that range, which suggests you should be transitioning to a post-scarcity collaborative model within the next few centuries. Admiral Vex felt his world crumbling around him as he realized the full scope of human involvement in Zephyrian affairs. You have been watching us like laboratory specimens. More like anthropological subjects, Dr. Clark corrected. We are genuinely interested in how different species navigate the transition from scarcity-based competition to abundance-based cooperation. Your empire has provided some fascinating data points about resource management and cultural integration strategies. Captain Morrison leaned forward, his expression serious but not unkind. Admiral, I want you to understand something important. We are not your enemies, and we are not your conquerors. We are more like older siblings who have been through the same challenges you are facing now. He activated another display that showed historical records of human development. The images depicted wars, conquests, and empire building that looked remarkably similar to current Zephyrian activities, followed by a gradual transition to more cooperative and sustainable models of civilization. We went through our own conquest phase about a millennium ago, Morrison explained. We built empires, fought wars over resources that turned out to be abundant, and made most of the same mistakes your species is making now. Eventually, we figured out that cooperation worked. Better than competition, especially once we developed the technology to make scarcity obsolete. Commander Keth, who had been quietly listening from the doorway, finally spoke up. Are you saying that our entire civilization is just a phase? That everything we have built, everything we have accomplished, is just something you grew out of? Not at all, Morrison replied firmly. Your achievements are real and impressive. The organizational skills, the technological innovations, the cultural synthesis you have accomplished are all valuable contributions to galactic civilization. The problem is not what you have built, but the assumption that conquest and dominance are the only ways to achieve security and prosperity. Dr. Clark nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. The infrastructure and social systems you have developed will be incredibly valuable once you transition to post-scarcity economics. Most of the hard work is already done. You just need to shift from a competitive mindset to a collaborative one. Admiral Vex sat in silence for several minutes, trying to process the magnitude of what he was learning. The Zephyrian Empire, which had been the center of his universe and the focus of his entire life, was apparently just one small experiment in a vast laboratory run by beings who had transcended the need for empire building centuries ago. What happens now? He asked finally. Do you destroy us? Absorb us into your own empire? Turn us into subjects like we have done to so many others? Morrison shook his head. None of those things. We offer you the same thing that was offered to us when we were ready to make the transition, a chance to graduate from the protection zone and join the wider galactic community as equals. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. The thing is, Admiral, conquest gets old fast. After you have defeated your first 100 enemies, the thrill starts to wear off. After your first 1,000 victories, it becomes routine. After you have conquered everything within reach, you start to wonder what the point was in the first place. Captain Morrison turned back to face the Zephyrian officers. We learned that the real challenge is not conquering other civilizations, but building something worth preserving for the future. That requires cooperation, not domination. The revelation hung in the air like a challenge that could not be ignored. Admiral Vex sat quietly for a long time, staring at the holographic displays that showed the true scale of human civilization. Everything he had believed about Zephyrian supremacy had been shattered in the span of a few hours, replaced by the humbling knowledge that his mighty empire was essentially a protected species in a cosmic preserve. Captain Morrison returned to his chair and leaned forward with the expression of someone about to make an important offer. Admiral, I want you to know that what happens next is entirely your choice. We are not here to force anything on you or your people, but we would like to extend an invitation. Dr. Clark opened another folder and spread out documents that looked very different from the observational studies she had shown earlier. These were program outlines, educational curricula, and integration protocols designed to help developing civilizations transition to post-scarcity economics and collaborative governance. The Human Integration Program has been helping species make this transition for about 6 centuries, she explained. We have worked with over 200 different civilizations, and the success rate is quite encouraging. About 80% of participating species complete the transition within 50 years. Admiral Vex looked at the documents with a mixture of curiosity and wounded pride. What does integration mean exactly? Do we become subjects of the human empire? Morrison laughed, but not unkindly. Admiral, humans do not have an empire anymore. We gave that up about the same time we figured out that scarcity was an artificial limitation. The integration program is more like a university exchange program than a conquest. Commander Keth, who had been studying the program documents, looked up with interest. These curricula cover topics I have never heard of. Dimensional engineering, reality modification, consciousness transfer protocols. Are these real technologies? Very real, Morrison confirmed. Though most of them become much easier to understand once you stop thinking in terms of resource competition. When you do not have to worry about someone else taking your stuff, you can focus on creating new possibilities instead of protecting what you already have. Captain Betty Newman had joined the group in Morrison's ready room, bringing with her a tablet displaying star charts that showed human settlements throughout the local galaxy cluster. She set the device on the table and activated a 3-dimensional map that made the earlier displays look small by comparison. The integration program starts with cultural exchange, she explained. We bring small groups,